Welcome back. The Deputy Leader of Reform UK and the MP for Boston and Skegness, Richar Tice, joins me in the studio. Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Lovely to see you.
Great to be with you.
You've got a bee in your bonnet about this VAT on private school fees. You want to are you launching a legal challenge?
No, so I indicated back in May that this ridiculous policy would end up in the courts, and sure enough, that's where it's heading, quite rightly, by some very significant parent groups that are emerging. And in the papers today, it's confirmed the first case of what will be many cases has written to the Chancellor, to the Treasury, and this is a parent who has an autistic child. And the issue with SEND children is really significant. There are about 110,000 special needs children,
yes.
special education needs children who are in independent schools, of whom about 100,000 don't get any educational health and care plan, therefore they're not exempt from this VAT policy. I suspect half of them are going to have to go back into the state system. That is, there aren't the places in the state system, which means these children...
Bridget Phillipson insists there are 650,000 spaces.
This is nonsense. I have hundreds of people emailing me saying she is lying. I'm afraid she's not telling the truth. I've got loads of people emailing me saying the state school locally has said they haven't got any room in their class sizes. There's no room for special education needs children. This is a catastrophe waiting to happen. And I think the government is going to be tied up in knots with legal cases. It's discriminatory. It's damaging the education of those children.
On what basis are they planning to sue then?
It's discrimination. It's a breach of the human rights and the ability to have a proper education. Because there aren't the special education needs places in the state system, they're saying we can't accommodate you, which means that you have to go into a mainstream school, which means that the education of your child is clearly damaged.
OK.
And that's
but
very
is this
serious.
A breach of Human Rights Act case or a ECHR thing?
It'll end up at the ECHR.
Yeah, but you want to smash the ECHR.
Well, there's a wonderful irony. If you can't beat them, join them. Wouldn't it be marvellous?
Well, you like it when it's convenient to your
Well, so does everybody, Camilla, even you. But the irony
I've never had recourse to apply for anything
the ECHR potentially ruling that it's discriminatory and then Starmer having to abide by the ECHR that he loves so much. That's where this could well go.
All right.
There's many other elements of discrimination. This one will run and run.
You're not just saying this because you're a private schoolboy once with kids at private schools, are you?
I'm saying this because education is it's the most important human right. It's the original charitable purpose. And the discrimination element of it. How can you discriminate against children from sort of 7 to 18, but then the elitist universities, they're not going to have VAT put on their fees? That's discriminatory too. I promise you, this is going to run and run in the courts.
We just had Lucy Fraser in the studio. Did you manage to catch that when you were in the green room?
I did catch most of this.
I just thought it was interesting what she was saying about Ofcom and BBC bias.
Yes, I mean,
What's your view?
Well, my view is that Ofcom, frankly, is not fit for purpose, and its treatment of other channels, such as GB News, compared to the way that it sort of that it mollycoddles the BBC, and you highlighted it there. The unfairness of the system, as Lucy said, that the BBC can basically self-regulate itself on behalf of Ofcom, and so, surprise, surprise, it behaves as it does. We all knew that it was clearly biased in its reporting of the horrific war in the Middle East. And, yeah, I think that Ofcom's got some serious questions to answer. At the very least, Ofcom should directly respond to complaints about the BBC. And the way they treat GB News and people like
I'm
Talk
going to be
TV
devil's advocate on this as a journalist rather than a politician. You know, Ofcom has expressed concerns that people like you and people like Nigel might come on a channel and start campaigning.
But they didn't express any concerns about David Lammy, for example, a Labour MP, on LBC. So
no longer there, though.
If you're going to be
in office.
Yeah, but if you're going to be a regulator, you've got to deal with a fair and just and equal hand, and they patently haven't done that.
All right. We need to get through quite a few questions in not very much time. You know the drill. Michel Barnier becoming French PM. I bet you're delighted about that, Richard.
Honestly, I mean, just extraordinary.
What? Well, do you think that's going to make life difficult for Reform particularly?
No, I tell you who it'll make life difficult for. Keir Starmer, who wants to cosy up to the EU, and Michel Barnier will be as difficult and demanding as he was under the Conservative government. And I think Keir Starmer will find that if he wants to reset the relationship, not that it needs resetting, by the way, then I think he'll find that he's going to he'll be literally legged over on anything he wants. And the risk is that we end up with freedom of movement through the back door. And this idea that he wants freedom of movement for young people up to 30. That was the whole freedom of movement programme.
Yes.
That means basically opening the doors to more mass immigration, which suppresses British wages.
Are you familiar with these AfD co-leaders, Tino Thrapala and Alice Weidel, who have risen up in Germany, being described as the far right? I mean, AfD the far right?
I'm not familiar with them at all. But the reality is that if you don't deliver for your people as a political class, and you lie about important things like immigration, you pretend it's not an issue, you say all will be fine and actually it's not and it suppresses wages, don't be surprised if people then vote for someone else. And that's the reason that so many 4.1 million people voted for reform, because they realise we're getting poorer, our quality of life is getting worse.
Quick word on the Tory leadership race. If a righty ends up leading the Tory party and actually restores it to its Thatcherite roots, somebody like Kemi Badenoch, arguably, Robert Jenrick, he's been on a journey from Remainer to apparently hard-right Eurosceptic.
He might as well carry on the journey to reform.
Well, he could do that. But isn't that problematic for you and Nigel? Because if you are up against a righty, a proper, fully-throated righty,
the truth is,
at the helm of the Conservatives, what's the point in voting reform?
The reality, you can't trust a word they say. I mean, do you know what Kemi Badenoch, this week in the article she wrote, sort of trying to be the tough person. The reality is...
Tough person on what? China, do you mean?
She was talking tough on China and net zero. 2 months ago, she wasn't saying any of this stuff.
Well, she did rail against quite a few things like
she didn't rail against China, she didn't rail against net zero. All of a sudden, because of what Reform is standing for, she's basically coming to our turf. You can't trust what these people say.
Is anyone else coming to your turf? Talk about Suella Braverman defecting. Have you had conversations with the former Home Secretary?
As you well know, I don't give a running commentary on any discussions. No, I won't. I'm not going to, because I want people to trust.
Are you having conversations with Conservatives?
I don't comment on any
You love
discussions.
commenting on all sorts of things.
I enjoy meeting and talking to the Conservatives in and around the chamber.
Trying to get them in the Reform camp.
I'm not giving a running commentary on chats we have in and around the chamber, but they're very friendly to me.
Suddenly being coy.
Very friendly
on GB
to me.
News, everybody. Lovely to see you.
Nice to see
Love
you.
to Boston and Skegness. Coming up next, we're going to be speaking to the former Conservative Party Treasurer and peer, Lord Farmer. He's got some interesting things to say about the arms embargo to Israel and the importance of family. Stay tuned for that.